Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. It's important to note that we actually had maybe a more significant media days beginning this week in Dallas. The Big 12 kicked off media days with a two-day event. And of course, the Big 12 right now is a fascinating conference because there is so much movement. I don't want to call it turmoil because I think the conference is very stable right now, but there's a lot of movement. This year coming up, it is the last year that Texas and Oklahoma will play in the league. The league is also welcoming in 4 new teams this year: UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, and who am I missing here? Houston. Love those Cougars. Love me some Cougars. Don't know how I miss Houston. Love Cougars. The Cougars. Houston Cougars, of course. What else would I be talking? Anyway, neither here nor there. But with that said, 14 teams this year with Texas and Oklahoma joining those 4, Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, and BYU. And then next year, it drops back down to 12 as Texas and Oklahoma leave. So again, a conference in transition. I wouldn't call it a conference in turmoil. That's not what it is at all. But of course, with the Big 12 comes the fascinating question of what is next. What is next for the Big 12? Are they going to stay at 12 after this year? Are they going to add 2 teams? Are they going to add 4 teams? Are they going to add 10 teams? What are we doing here? Are we breaking up the Pac-12? Are we just adding 2? Are we adding basketball schools? There is so much going on. And I thought we got some very interesting comments from Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, in 2 different instances on Wednesday at Big 12 Media Day. Now, he did the standard media day interviews, the standard media day kind of State of the Union address, if you will. But then after that, he did a sit-down one-on-one with On3, where he gave some very, very interesting comments that almost conflicted with the original comments that he made at Media Day. So I want to talk about both comments. I want to contextualize, and I want to explain what I think is going on with the Big 12 right now, because I do think Brett Yormark said last year Big 12 Media Days were open for business. I think he's sneaking behind the scenes and doing some stuff. Let's start with what he said to the public at Big 12 Media Days on Wednesday. Was asked about expansion and gave a very interesting quote as far as I'm concerned. Let me read the quote if I can pull it up here momentarily. That quote, Big 12 Media Days, this is what Brett Yormark said. He was asked about expansion beyond the 12 that they will have after Texas and Oklahoma leave. And he said, we do have a plan, and hopefully we can execute that plan sooner than later. But as I've always said, I love the composition of this conference right now. The excitement the 4 new members have brought to the conference has been incredible. If we stay at 12, we're perfectly fine with that. If the opportunity presents itself where there's something that creates value and aligns well with our goals and objectives, starting with the board, then we're going to certainly pursue that. Okay, so I want to read you that quote, and I'm going to read you the follow-up quote in a minute, because it's very clear that while Brett Yormark said that publicly, privately, he's thinking some other things. But starting with that quote, listen, we don't need to break it down too much, although I will explain in detail later on that there is an interesting part of that quote. But the bottom line is that's a very generic, we're happy with where we are, we love everything, it's all flowers and rainbows and sunshine, we have a plan, hopefully we can execute it. But as I've always said, I love the composition of this conference right now. The excitement the new members have brought to this conference has been incredible. If we stay at 12, I'm perfectly fine with that, Brett Yormark says. That's great. That's wonderful. That's, that's what you're supposed to say when you're the commissioner in front of, dozens, if not hundreds of media members at Media Day. Here's where it gets interesting, though. He did a separate one-on-one interview with On3 Sports, okay? And why I bring that up, why it's important, why it's relevant, is because if you read the interview he did with On3, it kind of sort of conflicts with what he said publicly. So again, publicly, last time he said the excitement the 4 new members have brought to this conference has been incredible. If we stay at 12, we're perfectly fine with that. Not really what he said when it came to his interview with On3. So On3 sat down with him for an exclusive interview. Here is the context of that, and I want to read 2 answers that he gave to On3. The first question he gave to the first answer he gave to On3. He said the question was this. He said, if we talk 2 years from now and you have not added 2 schools to get back to 14, would you be disappointed? Remember, Brett Yormark on Wednesday said publicly, we're perfectly happy. That was his exact quote. We are perfectly happy with 12. Well, here is what he said to On3 on Thursday in an interview that ran Friday. That's a great question. First time I've heard it been asked that way. I would say if in 2 years we have not solidified ourselves at 14, I would be a little bit disappointed just because I'm so bullish on our conference. I think there is really an opportunity and possibility out there for us. I love the 12. I think we have a great makeup right now, especially with the 4 new members coming in. But 2 years from now, I'd like to see us kind of look at things a little bit differently and maybe look a little bit differently. And hopefully that happens. And if that doesn't happen, it is okay. But I'd say I'd be slightly disappointed. The next question from On3. Is 14 the preferred number? Brett Yormark says, you know what? I'm not chasing a number, but I like 14. I like it. You think about media days, we're going 7 teams one day, 7 teams the next. It's a nice, even number. It's a nice number. I guess you can say I've gotten used to it a little bit, even though it's our first time as a 14-team league. To the extent that we can stay there, it would be great. If we go back to 12 and stay at 12, I guess that's okay too, but 14 kind of feels like the right number. Okay, so let's just make sure we have all that straight. Just going to replay you kind of do the Men in Black. We're going to reframe everything just so you understand. Wednesday, media days in front of dozens of media members. Here was Brett Yormark. If we stay at 12, we're perfectly fine with that. On Thursday into Friday, if we go back to 12 and stay at 12, I guess that's okay too, but 14 kind of feels right. So it's very clear here that if you pay close attention, there is a disconnect. There is a disconnect between what the commissioner wants and maybe what publicly he has to state, because ultimately we need to remember one thing, and this is maybe the most important part of expansion in college sports that you need to know. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we think of a conference commissioner as a guy or a girl who runs a college sports conference, okay? We think of them as being in charge, unilateral, they answer to no one. Well, it's actually not true at all. Remember, conference commissioner answers to school presidents. That happens in the Big 12, that happens in the Big 10, that happens in the SEC. Why did the SEC play football in 2020 and the Big 10 tried to cancel? It's because the Big 10 presidents did not want to play football. Kevin Warren, for all of the criticism I had of him, didn't really have a choice. He had to relay the message for his school presidents. Same, by the way, in sports, right? Roger Goodell makes a lot of money, but he ultimately works for the 32 NFL owners. And so I bring it up because it is a very interesting dichotomy between what he's saying publicly, but then what he says he prefers. And what I do think it comes down to is very simple and very straightforward. There's a disconnect, at least right now, this second, from what the school presidents want and what Brett Yormark wants. And again, let's go back to that first statement that he dropped on Wednesday, because there was an interesting quote in there that I kind of glossed over. Listen to this again. If the opportunity presents itself where there's something that creates value and aligns with our goals and objectives, starting with the board, then we're certainly going to pursue it. That last part is important. Starting with the board. Starting with the board. In other words, if I can get sign off from these 12 kooky school presidents, we are going to move forward. And so to me, that is the underlying theme and underlying message of realignment, is that if you remember an expansion, and if you remember back to the last couple months, this has been a very hot topic for the last 3, 4, 5 months, in part because we're trying to figure out what's going on with the Pac-12, but we're trying to figure out if the Big 12 can expand. And if you go back to April, May, even early June, it felt like there was real momentum. Like this week it's this school, that week it's that school. Could San Diego State be in the mix? Could Gonzaga be in the mix? What about UConn, Colorado? How many Pac-12 schools? And then it all kind of died down. And you know when it started to die down? In late May, when the school presidents met. And it was clear at that point that prior to that mid to late May timeframe, Brett Yormark was being aggressive. He was being fearless. I can tell you, I know for a fact he was on several campuses talking with administrators, presidents, ADs, coaches, etc. Then mid-May happened. Then you get 12 school presidents together, and a funny thing happens. A funny thing happens, and that's this. 12 school presidents have 12 different agendas and 12 different interests. Some presidents, full speed ahead. Commish, whatever you want, you're in charge, we're going to sign off. There's others, they want to see the financials. How does it work? What does it mean? This and that. Some only want to add teams through football. If you don't play big boy football, we don't want you Gonzaga. You know, San Diego State is out because of obviously that time frame. UConn we're going to get into in a minute. But some just want, if you're not in the Power 5, if you don't play big boy football right now, we don't want you. Some are more interested in the basketball element of it, something we've talked about on this show before. So that's what becomes interesting to me, is that it's clear that the conference, the school presidents, I don't want to say they're comfortable at 12, but they need a little bit more convincing. But it's also clear to me, because he said it on the record, that Brett Yormark wants to be at 14. And so what I think has to happen now, I think the next step is pretty clear. And I think it's a few things. One, I do think that this week at Big 12 Media Days, I do think it was very much about, listen, let's celebrate these 4 new teams that are entering our conference. BYU, love them Cougars. Houston, love them Cougars. UCF, Cincinnati. Let's focus on them. Let's make it about them. We don't need to undercut them with all this talk about adding other teams. This is their day. This is their moment. Let's do it. That's one. 2, and I've said this for a month and a half, 2 months now. We're all waiting on this Pac-12 media rights deal, because at the end of the day, I believe Colorado is not only ready to jump ship, but they've been ready. And the one thing holding them up, they got to see what the Pac-12 is going to offer in that next TV deal. Because again, we've talked about it before. You can't, if you're Colorado, openly leave the conference if you don't know what the media rights deal is. In other words, if somehow, some way, the Pac-12 pulls a rabbit out of its hat and puts together a TV deal that is better or greater than the Big 12's, then Colorado's going to look stupid leaving money on the table to go from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. That is what we are waiting on. When is the Pac-12 going to give us real numbers? And when the numbers hit, are they going to be good enough to convince Colorado to stay? 2 thoughts on that. One, I don't think the numbers are going to be good enough. Listen, we've talked about it enough on this show, but if the Pac-12 had a salient media rights contract to offer its schools, we would have found out by now. Remember, Big Ten, June 30th last year was when USC and UCLA were announced, okay? It was within weeks that we got we crossed the T's and dot the I's on that stuff. It was already done. We announced USC and UCLA, and within a week or 2, all the details were finalized. Well, we are now basically a month past that point for the Pac-12, and we have nothing. We have no new information. And again, we talked about it on Monday's show. San Diego State was waiting for that June 30th date to get the invite. The invite never came. It's because there's no contract. If there was a contract, San Diego State would have been invited. So I bring it up to say, I don't think the Pac-12 has a contract. I think it would have been presented by now, and I don't know when it's coming. Pac-12 Media Day is this week on Friday. And you would think they would want to present something that day, but I have not talked to anybody in the industry that expects them to have a piece of information for their schools that the schools are going to be happy with. So that is worth monitoring, and it's also worth monitoring that number 14. Brett Yormark wants to go to 14, and I am here to tell you, I think it's what's going to happen. Once Colorado sees that number from the Pac-12, and by the way, I say all this, I'm just being an unbiased media member. I'm not saying what I want, what I hope for. I'm just telling you what I believe is going on behind the scenes and what is ultimately going to happen. The Pac-12 is ultimately going to present that number. Colorado is going to say, that's not good enough. And then from there, they will leave. Then from there, UConn, I believe, and it's not because it's my alma mater, is next in line. Yormark is interested in that Northeast market. Yormark is interested in the East Coast. Yormark is interested in a lot of things that UConn presents. I understand the football element of it. I'm here to tell you, listen, give UConn Big 12 money. They can be competitive in football. I'm not saying they're going to win the league. I'm not going to say they're better than Baylor and Kansas State, whatever. But they won 6 games last year under Jim Mora in year 1. And that was coming off whatever it was, a 1-11 season the year before. Give them $35 million to invest back in football. I think they can be competitive. I'm here to tell you, I think Colorado and UConn are the 2 schools that Yormark has his eyes on. I find it very interesting that he says 14 schools is where he wants to be, even though, oh, by the way, on whatever day it was, he said, no. On Wednesday, no, if we stay at 12, 12's fine. It's no big deal. Yeah, that's not true at all.